Good morning, everybody. Another word of welcome to those of you that have joined us in the last couple of seconds. This is Linda Jackson speaking to you from Food Focus, and it's our great pleasure to be hosting the Dairy Standard Agency this morning on their webinar, An Introduction to Dairy Product Labelling in South Africa. We're going to be hearing from Janusz Luterek from Hahn & Hahn. We're going to be chatting to Dr. Marianne Wicks from the Northwest University, and we're going to be chatting to Jody True, and she's one of the technical managers from the Dairy Standard Agency. In the background is also Jompi Burger from the Dairy Standard Agency, and he'll be saying hello and goodbye to us a little later. And when it comes to making sure that we've got all the right arrangements, my colleague Adele is also in the background, and she might be chatting to you during the course of the presentation. If any of you do have questions, she'll be able to assist you while we're going through the presentation today. What have we got in store for you? Well, this is what the program looks like. We're going to go straight into a very, very comprehensive presentation on the regulatory landscape. At the end of the day, what goes on your label is stipulated by law, but not just one law, a number of laws, which is where it starts to get tricky. So we're leaving the legal stuff to the lawyer. So Janusz will be taking us through that. We then will go over to Dr. Wicks, who will talk about the nutrient profiling aspect. Obviously, this is quite important when it comes to the labeling aspect, particularly if you are making claims on your labels. So Marianne will be giving us some information in that respect. And then Jody will be taking us step by step through the DSA product labeling guide. And we're actually going to be going online to see this amazing free tool which can assist you with evaluating your own labels to make sure that you're getting it right. But Jody's not just giving you something for free, she's also making you do tests. So during Jody's presentation, we will actually run a number of interactive polls where we would very much like you to participate so that we can gauge understanding. Don't worry, you're anonymous, so it will just give you an opportunity to participate in today's workshop. And then finally, Jompi will be closing off today. Right, so before we get into the next set of slides, I'm going to now just hand over to Janusz. Janusz, thank you so much for coming on board today to assist us. And won't you please bring up your presentation so that you can take us through what we need to understand when it comes to the law. So Janusz is an esteemed friend and colleague, and he's been working with us on many, many webinars. It's always great to have him. Janusz is both a chemical engineer as well as a registered attorney. He has 2 degrees, and he has been a partner at Hahn & Hahn since 1997. Hahn & Hahn specialize in technology law and intellectual property law. And Janusz does a lot of his work within the food industry. He's a custodian member of SAFOST, and he also sits on the Food Law Advisory Group of the Department of Health. So not only does he know the law and reads the law, but he also participates in writing or assisting the government to write the law. So Janusz, won't you take it away from the beginning of your slide presentation would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here today. I just wanted to hold up a typical example of labeling, milk bottles. There you go. And I had a look at this label, and the only reference to milk, by the way, is that it says that as an allergen, it may have cow's milk, which I found quite amusing. Okay, so today's topic, obviously, I can only do a bit of an overview because otherwise we'd be here for several hours. But let's just start with the legal landscape when it comes to dairy, because it is actually quite complex and it's important to understand it. So it's jumped up in front of it. There we go. So it's brought to you by Hahn & Hahn. Let's start with the outline. So when you consider the structure of the law in South Africa, to put things very simply, where it's a food public health issue, it should be the Department of Health that regulates it. For example, permissible ingredients, allergens, and general food labeling, where it's not specifically prescribed by another regulation. But you will know that in the dairy regulations, for example, it refers to additives or ingredients which are allowed under the food labeling regulations. So the FCD Act and regulations will specify what is permissible, and then under the dairy regulations, I will have more detail. You also have, for example, R155, which also relates to dairy food safety issues, as opposed to just purely compositional issues. And one that comes up from time to time in relation to dairy are the infant food regulations, R991. That is all under the Department of Health. In another ministry, now called the Department of Agriculture and Land Reform and Development, something like that. Anyway, DALLRD. It was much easier when it was called DAF. Under that law, you have the Agricultural Product Standards Act and the regulations. For example, the dairy regulations R1510 and the juice regulations R286. Different ministry, different people, different silos, so to speak. Then the other thing we have to consider is what are the issues which are currently sort of in the law and in the public eye. The one is the genetically modified organisms, and that falls under the CPA and its regulations. And the reason I mention this is if you have products that contain cornstarch, that cornstarch may in fact be from genetically modified corn, and this may affect you. You have the issue of general deception of consumers, and again, the Consumer Protection Act and the regulations regulate this, but that would be also in addition to what is already in R146 under the Foodstuffs Act and R1510 under the Agricultural Product Standards Act. So it's another law that comes into effect. Then we have self-regulation on marketing of products, which would obviously include dairy products. And there we have something called the Advertising Regulatory Board, or ARB. And then just very briefly, I wanted to mention the issue of product recalls. Just recently, I was involved in the recall of the grape liquid fruit products. It is actually quite complex and has to be done in a very specific way. So as you've seen from my first few slides, there's no single regulatory authority for any type of product in South Africa. Products can fall under various regulatory authorities. I like to call this product jurisdiction fragmentation. The FCD Act enforcement, the Foodstuffs Act enforcement is by the EHPs, and it's at municipal level in general. The Department of Agriculture, up there it still says DAF, DALRAD, has an inspectorate and assignees. And of course, as you will all know, those that are in the industry, mainly now it's the assignees that are doing the inspections. We also have the Department of Trade and Industry, and this includes all matters related to the Consumer Protection Act, as well as the National Regulator for Compulsory Standards, which is another authority which has something to say about how you package and label your product. And then we have self-regulation, which is the Consumer Goods and Services Ombudsman and the Advertising Regulatory Board. So some of the current issues you need to be aware of are non-compliant imports. Those of you that happen to be in that field, and just recently I've become aware that Port Health is stopping products coming in at the border. In other words, they're not allowing you to bring a non-compliant product into South Africa and then change the labeling locally. If your labeling is non-compliant with R146, Port Health will actually stop it from coming into the country. Their view is you should be adding those labels to make it compliant with South Africa on the other side of the sea before it gets put into the container. For example, I know of a case where because products had no English on the label, they were turned away, even though the importer had the intention to put it into a warehouse and to stick labels on in South Africa. Your product can be turned away, for example, if you're non-compliant with R1510. We know previously there was the matter of the percentage fat in full cream milk. In such instances as well, the product will not be allowed to come into South Africa. Trickier are things like the E-mark and other NRCS non-compliances to do with SANS 289, for example, not having milliliters on it, but ounces, wrong letter sizes, no spacing. But very specifically, the E-mark, be very aware of it. Then the other issue we have at the moment is pre-approval of labels. You know, companies have got very used to the fact that they would go to DAF and they would say, please check my label for me, and DAF would check their label for them. For what it was worth, they would get a letter to say you comply with R260 or whatever the regulation was in those days, and they would happily believe that their label was compliant. Those of you who have tried this recently probably know that the assignees no longer approve labels. And then just throwaway line, CBD and cannabis in foodstuffs and supplements. I've just about seen every type of foodstuff you can imagine going onto the market which contains CBD. but I haven't seen a dairy product. But I think it's only a matter of time till somebody tries to sell a chocolate milk with CBD or a yogurt with CBD or something like that. So dairy products could also be offered on the market as health and nutritional supplements, not realizing that in fact they need to be registered under the Medicines and Related Substances Act. I have seen some products, not in South Africa, but internationally, which in South Africa would qualify as a nutritional supplement. Another major issue at the moment is the enforcement of these various laws and regulations. Now, for a very long time, I would emphasize the lack of enforcement. Let me tell you, if you're in industry, it's changed. The wheel has turned. Full enforcement has started. And if you're not compliant, you will pay the consequences. Be very, very wary. A big change has occurred. Enforcement is coming at you from all directions. Another major issue at the moment is recall and product liability under the Consumer Protection Act. And then finally, if you're a person in charge of a premises, you must understand that you would also be liable in the case of non-compliant labeling. Believe it or not, Regulation 10 in R638 makes the person in charge liable for non-compliant labeling. So let's talk about the enforcement issues. Firstly, we have the Advertising Regulatory Board. Then I'm going to address how are labeling regulations enforced in various departments. How does one handle an offence by a competitor? And then a very touchy one is people who claim to have trademarks and copyright, etc., and therefore want to insist on using various claims on products. So who are the ARB? Where do they fit in? The ARB was established by the marketing and communication industry. It's a self-regulating system. It's an independent body, and they have a code of conduct. It's very important that you check all your advertisements before you launch any campaign to make sure it complies with the ARB code. Failure to do so could result in an adverse finding against you by the ARB. Now, the ARB is free to a consumer, but if you're a competitor, you have to pay to lodge a complaint. It's much simpler than any court procedure. But unfortunately, the ARB can only consider matters provided for in the ARB code and cannot rule on legal non-compliance. So you cannot lodge a complaint with the ARB that a competitor is not complying with R1510 or R146 or one of those. The ARB also has no jurisdiction in technical matters, and very importantly, it's only binding on its own members. Now, that last line is important to understand. Is you can claim that you're not a member and therefore the ARB has no authority over you. But the ARB can issue a directive to its members not to advertise or sell your products and thereby taking you out of the market. Point 2 was how are labeling regulations enforced in various departments, and this is really just a very brief overview. So under the Department of Health Food Control, this is shared between several authorities. There are different levels. There's national, provincial, and local, and we have EHPs in the audience today, and they would typically fall under provincial or local, depending what size municipality they're in. But there are common difficulties, and that is lack of staff, lack of training in some cases, and in some cases, there are very complex scientific and legal issues which do require additional input. So the principle of enforcement under Department of Health is at local level, and the DOH coordinates such activities as food product recalls, but cannot in fact order an EHP to do something. All they can do is they can advise EHPs on their interpretation of an act or regulation. There are district and local authorities, the municipalities, and they deal with food control in their area of jurisdiction, including labeling, and they deal with hygiene control, for example, R638. And then we have the provincial departments of health, and they also offer the specialized services such as import control, which is done on behalf of the Department of Health. Let's talk about DOH approval of labels. And very simply, DOH does not approve labels. It needs to be understood. DOH does not check or approve labels. DOH does not enforce the labeling regulations, and there's no provision in either FCD Act or R146 for the approval of labels by DOH. If you have a medicine or one of those products, a complementary medicine, then SAHPRA, which falls under Department of Health, approves your label, but not for foodstuffs. So therefore, the duty is on you to ensure labels are compliant, and you need to get advice if you're unsure. Because the first time you will hear from the Department of Health is when your label in the marketplace is non-compliant. So it doesn't want to change. There we go. What about the Department of Agriculture? They have enforcement at national level, and there you have the Directorate of Food Safety and Quality Assurance, and they, for example, enforce the APS Act under which the dairy regulations fall. They typically carry out their own inspections, but have now appointed assignees, for example, Neja Mogul for dairy products. So the primary point of inspection at the moment for your products would actually be Neja Mogul, and only if you need to escalate something would you escalate it to the directorate. As regards the assignee, they charge fees in respect of the powers they exercise and the duties performed by the executive officer or the assignee, as the case may be, to ensure compliance. In the case of the powers exercised by them and duties performed by them, the assignee can charge a fee which is determined by the assignee. Now, there is some protection in that the assignee cannot simply charge any amount they want. Their fees are published for comment and are finally approved by Department of Agriculture before they can go into effect. In terms of inspection by the assignees, the assignee can at any time during the business hours of the industry in question, in the case of compliance to regulations, they can enter your place where any product is produced, processed, treated, prepared, classified, etc., etc., and then they can inspect or test or cause to be tested any quantity of a product. Now, any quantity is limited by the regulations in terms of the sampling programs and sampling protocols. But in fact, from my experience, they've been very realistic with the amount of product they've been taking for inspection. So the assignee will take a sample as he or she deems necessary or as per the regulations, and immediately after taking them, they will send it to a laboratory which is competent to do the testing, to inspect or analyze the sample. They can also require you as the owner of the company or the business to produce any documents, extracts, labels, etc. for inspection. So the assignee, although they do not pre-approve labels, when they come to inspect, they will inspect the label for compliance as well as sending the product away for analysis. So what are the scope of powers of the assignee? They limited the particular product for which they were appointed, for example, dairy. They can only inspect in terms of what the regulations require. They inspect for compliance with the regulation. They are not inspecting for arbitrary quality characteristics. I had this in another industry where there was a assignee that tried to generalize it and go into a quality audit, which is not what it's about. They have to sample in accordance with the regulations, and you need to pay for the privilege. As I said, they don't approve labels, and the onus is on the manufacturer, retailer, or importer to ensure that their labels are compliant, and then when it's being inspected, the assignee will check if they are compliant. The assignee can have a warrant, and they could come and do a search, etc. But very importantly, the assignee, once they find your product is not compliant, they cannot issue a dispensation. Only the executive officer can issue a dispensation. So if your product is not compliant and you haven't applied for a dispensation, the assignee can enter your premises with a warrant issued by the court and seize any product or any article, etc. And if you won't let them in, they could even use force. They could bring the police with them to enter your product to conduct such a search and seizure. When they do a seizure, they can seize some of the products or some of your materials or your books or documents to prove what you were doing, which was contravening the law. And they can do that if they suspect that a crime is being committed or anything is being stored on your premises intended in the commission of such an offence. If they, however, decided not to prosecute you, they would have to return whatever has been seized. By the way, seize doesn't mean they physically come with trucks and drive away with it. They could, in fact, just quarantine it and say, all of this product is being seized subject to the outcome of the case or whatever happens. The assignees have a duty of secrecy. They need to keep all information which relates to your business affairs secret, as long as it is in the line of duty. There are a couple of exceptions to this, and for example, it could be in the interest of the public for the protection of consumers that they disclose some of your information. if there are any legal proceedings, or if they are ordered by a court to disclose information, or if the minister authorizes them to disclose information. If you disagree with what an inspector or an assignee has done, you can appeal. You lodge the appeal in the prescribed way during the prescribed period, and you pay the appeal fee to the Department of Agriculture. An appeal board is appointed, and depending on the outcome of the hearing, either you or the assignee will be bound by the decision of the appeal board, and the appeal board will issue their decision together with the reasons for why they came to that conclusion. I have served on such an appeal board. It actually is quite a big job, and you need to understand the law and provide a proper opinion. Otherwise, the appeal will be taken on review to the High Court. Fortunately, none of the appeals where I've been on the appeal board have ever gone before the courts. What are the offences and penalties? Well, it's a criminal offence not to pay the assignee. Very important. You can't simply refuse to pay the assignee. It's a criminal offence not to pay the assignee. It's an offence to obstruct the assignee in doing their job. Obviously, if people arrive at your premises and claim they're assignee and they're not, that's a criminal offence. It's a criminal offence to falsify any certificate or report, etc. And you can even go to prison for doing these things. I put this slide on because it's still relevant at this stage, and that is that in the past, the Department of Agriculture was doing pre-approvals of labels, and I have seen problems with some of these pre-approvals. And the short answer is this: it doesn't matter if the assignee or the inspector had pre-approved your label. If it's wrong, it's wrong. If the pre-approval read clearly in terms of the regulations was not correct, it will still be wrong. The solution, of course, is not to rely on such a pre-approval, but to do it yourself or get advice from someone who knows how to do it. Where you have been told your label is right, but in fact it was wrong, and I repeat again, the fact that they told you is right doesn't make it right if it's wrong. You can, however, ask for a dispensation to sell out your non-compliant product, which was approved, while you are changing the label. There's no chance at all that they will say to you, well, since we approved it, why don't you just carry on? They will require from you a program. How are you changing your label? And I've even had a case where they've been most unsympathetic. They gave my client a very short period of time to sell out their product, which was in fact not long enough to sell out all the product. And they had no interest at all in my client's pleas that they have a lot of packaging which is lying in a warehouse and which will now have to be thrown away. What about dispensations at DALRAD? Well, there's a formal procedure. You get a form. You have a letter to the competent division explaining the circumstances. But be very, very wary. A dispensation application is an admission of guilt. When you fill in that application for a dispensation, you are saying, I agree my label is wrong. Please be lenient with me and allow me to sell out my product or whatever it is you're asking. If it later turns out they don't want to grant you the dispensation, there is no going back. You've already admitted your label is wrong. You can't then decide to file an appeal. What are you appealing? You've already admitted your label is wrong. Be very, very wary. My practical hint is first organize a meeting and try and dissolve it without a dispensation. Only if it cannot be resolved that way and you are already changing your labels do you apply for a dispensation. Sorry. Enforcement under the APS Act is very simple. You get a directive to comply. They tell you how long you've got. You can ask for a dispensation, and then you can resolve it by fixing the problem. If there's a seizure notice, it's too late. There's no dispensation possible. You have to stop sale immediately, and the only remedy is to rectify the problem or discard the product, or of course fight it in court. And then the final step would be prosecution, and that's where you can get fines or imprisonment. Please remember, there's no possibility of dispensation at Department of Health or Department of Trade and Industry. There's no dispensation under the Medicines and Related Substances Act for supplements. There's no dispensation under the National Regulator for Compulsory Standards. Only under R638 under Department of Health can you get a dispensation, but it's a very limited dispensation for Regulation 14. Just very quickly, as long as an assignee or an inspector is acting in good faith, if they make a mistake, you can't hold them liable. If you have to destroy R1 million of packaging, that's just your tough luck. You best have insurance for it. When it comes to the Department of Trade and Industry, we've got the National Consumer Commission, the National Regulator for Compulsory Standards, which enforces compliance with compulsory specifications. And we've got ITAC, which is more to do with import and export control, and you've got provincial consumer protectors. The most important one likely is the National Regulator for Compulsory Standards. Sorry, it's not SASN, it's SANS, typo, SANS 289, and that deals with things such as letter sizes, indication of quantity, where, how, etc. And a very important one that's coming up more and more in other fields is the issue of slack fill. I don't see it much in the dairy industry, but just be aware of it, that if your packaging is much bigger than the contents, you can have a problem with something called slack fill. And then we have SANS 1841 and the E-mark. And my comments to you, do not use the E-mark unless you are registered, as your product will be seized. You will be ordered to remove the product from sale and cover up the E-mark, or if it's at border control, it may in fact be stopped there and prevented from entering the country. So what are the possible procedures when it's inter-competitor? The previous number of slides, or I like to call vertical, regulatory authority and you. But now you're in the market, and I get this a lot. Clients come to me and say, we've spent so much time and money making sure our labeling is incorrect. But Johnny over there, look what he's selling, and why isn't anybody telling them they can't do that? So there's a number of avenues you have as a supplier that has actually done all the work to make sure your product is compliant, and now you are being disadvantaged in the marketplace by a competitor who's not compliant. So first of all, if they're making a false claim on their product, you could report it to the Advertising Regulatory Board. You'll have to pay it if it's a competitor complaint, but you may be able to convince a member of the public to lodge a fee complaint. If it's a R146, in other words, a general food labeling transgression, then you would need to go to the municipality in which the factory is located and lodge a complaint with the EHP. They should be able to action it through their channels, through their provincial committees, and then distribute that information interprovincially. And there's a whole complicated process whereby a national distributor can be addressed through the EHP route. But if it's obviously a local producer, you may be able to address it right there at the factory. If it's legislation under, it says DAF because there wasn't enough space on the slide, under the Department of Agriculture, you would report them to the Directorate of Food FSQA, or an assignee directly, and then they would investigate it and deal with it. I've done this on a number of occasions, and they've actually been very responsive and very good. If it's a Consumer Protection Act issue, misleading advertising, issues like that, possibly not disclosing genetically modified ingredients, you could lodge a complaint with the competent Provincial Consumer Affairs Office, the National Consumer Commission, or the Consumer Goods and Services Ombudsman. If it's a weights and measures or an E-mark issue, you can lodge a complaint with the NRCS. I have successfully helped clients have competitor products which were imported, removed from sale by the NRCS for non-compliance with what so-called weights and measures, and E-mark. Product came from overseas, was not compliant with our requirements under SANS 289. And as the ultimate fallback position, you could go to court and claim that the competitor has an unfair advantage due to non-compliance with the law and no action from the regulatory authorities. There's case law on this, you can do it, but it's very expensive. Okay, let's talk, we're almost near the end now. Let's talk about intellectual property law and its impact on labeling, because it's very important. Trademarks on labels and in claims on products. So, the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act has no general saving provisions for trademarks. There is a statement relating to trademarks which existed before the FCD Act came into effect, but the FCD Act is Act 54 of 1972, and it came into effect in 1973. So if you have a 47-year-old trademark, under certain circumstances, you may be saved. Certainly, there's absolutely no benefit at all in running out trying to register a trademark today because you want to use something which is prohibited under R146. R146 prohibits use of deceptive or misrepresenting names. There's no trademark saving provision. A trademark that is deceptive in the message it conveys cannot be used. R429, the draft, which was supposed to replace R146, went a lot further in prohibiting trademarks, but it hasn't come into effect. We'll see what the next version says. Under the Agricultural Product Standards Act, there are in fact saving provisions for trademarks in some regulations. So trademarks had to be registered before the regulation was promulgated, or the first time the claim, name, etc. was prohibited. So in R1510, under Regulation 32.2, it specifically says that in order to continue using a trademark, it had to be in use prior to November 1987. So that's 33 years ago, if my calculation is right. Is that right? 33 years ago? So if you had your trademark already for 33 years, there are circumstances under which you will be able to continue using it, which you would not have been able to do if you tried to do it today and you didn't have a registered trademark. Your keywords here, registered trademark. The Consumer Protection Act has no exception for misleading or deceptive names or images contained in a registered trademark, and there's simply a blanket prohibition on deceptive practices. So what are the penalties for a labeling offence? So under the Foodstuffs Cosmetic Disinfectants Act, you can get a fine of up to 50,000 or 6 months imprisonment or both. Second offence, 100,000 or 12 months. Third offence, 200,000 or 24 months. Under the APS Act, the penalties differ according to the type of offence, but a false or misleading description, such as Section 6 of the APS Act or certain sections of R1510. First offence, fine or imprisonment up to 2 years. Second offence and thereafter, fine and imprisonment up to 4 years. We haven't had people getting these fines, but as enforcement has now stepped up, I'm expecting to start seeing prosecutions. Under the Consumer Protection Act, there's a possibility of a fine up to 12 months or imprisonment or both, but the scale of the fines is not exceeding 10% of the annual turnover or 1 million rand, whichever is the higher. So there are examples of fines of this nature running into tens and hundreds of millions, not under these circumstances, but under similar provisions in the National Credit Act, and the fines are issued by the same body called the National Consumer Tribunal, so there could in fact be huge fines. Under the Medicines and Related Substances Act, if you were selling some little thimble full of yogurt with some vitamins and things added and claiming it cured something or had some health benefit, which you're not allowed to say, that is in fact a criminal offence under the Medicines and Related Substances Act, and you can in fact get up to 10 years in prison. So what are the possible consequences for the products? So the fines and imprisonment is one thing, but in fact this could be a bigger consequence. All your product can be forfeit, destroyed, taken away from you, or you can be ordered to relabel it. Now, if you've got several million containers of product and are ordered to relabel it, that could be a fortune. Would be a bigger fortune if you're ordered to destroy it, because not only have you lost the product, but you also have to pay for waste disposal and to get a certificate that has been safely disposed of. Believe me, the costs are very high. I've been dealing with some of these issues not too long ago. And that's it. That's my very short overview presentation. I hope I didn't take too much time. And yes, we are open for questions.
Thank you very much, Janusz. As always, very, very informative. So I take it that you're going to have a snack now to replenish your energy from
my milk bottle.
Your milk bottles. Okay, so just one question that's come through, which I think is relevant to be answered at this point. Yes. And that relates to R429. And just to confirm that R429 is still in draft and has not been fully promulgated, am I correct?
Well, no, so R429 is of no value, no effect, means nothing. You can just sort of forget about it for now, because a regulation only comes into effect once it's promulgated. R429 went out in draft and disappeared into the ether. So please, R146 is where it is. R429, we have no idea what the next draft would look like, but I would take an assumption, I would make a very educated assumption that it's going to be dramatically different from R429 as you saw it.
Great. Okay, so that's important to note. Just one other comment: the port health issues. So, I mean, people on port health is now stopping the container and is requiring the product to be labelled correctly in the country of from the country of origin. I'm saying. Yes, that's the way it's supposed to be done. Am I correct?
No, you are. But what's happened for many, many years, if not decades, is they would allow the product to come in, and then they would allow you to keep it in a bonded warehouse, or you would give them an undertaking, and they would say, okay, take it to your warehouse, quarantine it, and be a nice boy and relabel it. And they've now turned, and in a sudden switch, they've suddenly said, no. If you read the Act Section 2 and you read R146, the regulations, it says you may not import a product that doesn't comply with R146. Therefore, we do not allow it into the country, and we're not allowing you into the bonded area of the ports to relabel either. So therefore, you must send it back.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that that's the correct way that it's supposed to be done, because it's just so easy to get lost in the market.
We know with the illegal cigarettes and the liquor how much left the factories and never got to where it was going, and yet everybody could buy cigarettes. So we know this happens. But I think the only difficulty I have is sudden changes in philosophy. So if you've allowed people to do something for 50 years or 47 years, to one day tell them we're no longer doing this without warning, I think is problematic. And I think if it goes to court, the court may in fact overrule the Department of Health. Not that it can't do it, but that it can't do it suddenly.
Yes. So it's just let's work together here to make this process of enforcement effective. I suppose you can appreciate, given the circumstances that we've been dealing with, that it's almost necessitated a sudden and change because of all of the problems, particularly in relation to the products that you're referring to, the cigarettes and alcohol. But I think in general, we're trying to work together from that perspective.
Absolutely.
Okay, a couple of interesting technical ones coming through. Janusz, Jessica, thanks for your question. Relabeling. So the relabeling requirements, does that allow for relabeling in terms of a bulk label? So, where you've got product that is, I'm assuming, Jessica, that it's coming in bulk packaging and you're purely just selling it on in bulk packaging. You're not down packing that product. The labeling requirements would still apply, or in this case, it's not going as a consumer product, it's going as a bulk product. Janusz?
So, because it depends what its purpose is. If it's going into the trade and will be broken down and sold to consumers there, then it in fact has to still comply. But if it's going to go into the catering market or into manufacturing, then all that will be required is that it's accompanied by trade documents that contain all the information which should be on a label. So that will be really easy to change. Somebody can just email you through an updated document. I would think it'll be very difficult for the department to say, well, we're not going to accept a replacement email document to another email document. But that's not the same as relabeling.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about this. Labels coming in all sorts of languages except English.
Yes.
So first of all, my limited understanding of the law says that you've got to at least have it in English for it to be sold in South Africa. Could it be dual? Can there be a dual label? So there's the English as well as Arabic or Chinese, for example.
Oh, sure. I don't know. You can have, as long as you can meet the letter size requirements. You meet all of those as a regulation 18R146, or is that 7? I can't remember the number now, which tells you what the letter sizes have to be, etc. As long as you can meet all of that, you're fine. I don't have a problem. I mean, there is some people that say, well, it says at least English. Now, if you've got space on your label for Arabic and Russian, why can't we have Zulu and isiXhosa? But let's face it, no one has ever tried to enforce that. And for an imported label, I suppose it wouldn't make sense. It also, our own manufacturers in South Africa don't do that. So they label in English, Portuguese, and French because they're shipping out into Mozambique and into other African countries. So it wouldn't be fair to require an importer to use more South African languages if we ourselves don't. But certainly you can have any number of languages as long as English is one and all the other requirements are met. The letter sizes, the NRCS requirements, the R1510 requirements, etc.
Okay, and then where does the buck stop in this regard? So, you know, I'm walking down the aisle and I happen to pick up some really great, authentic looking Chinese noodles from my local retailer, and those are not correctly labeled. And in terms of the law, who actually is responsible for the fact that the product is not correctly labeled in accordance with South African legislation?
So the way the law is written, everybody, it's the retailer, the importer, the distributor, all of them are in fact liable. And I want to say to people that the retailer should be the final gatekeeper, because the first time a lot of people see your product is when it's on the shelf. So that's in fact the most likely place for the problem to be picked up. And when I deal with directives on dairy products, 95% of them or 90% of them relate to products seen in store. And then a directive is issued. This label has to be corrected or changed. So everybody's in the boat, so to speak. Obviously, the retailer should have a back-to-back agreement or supply agreement with their supplier that says everything you supply me has to comply with the law. But the product could still get confiscated from the retailer, and then they would have to sue their supplier, or alternatively return it to the supplier in terms of their agreement.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, one last comment and then I'm going to change presenters. When it comes to who can I expect to come in to enforce the legal requirements, because of the way that it's currently set up, I shouldn't be surprised to see the DELRAD assignee, if I'm manufacturing dairy products, in accordance with the APS requirements. But then I shouldn't then also be surprised when the EHP knocks on my door in relation to 146 and also in relation to 638. So we might have to have tea and coffee with a number of people.
But there's more, because there's also the NRCS. So they are in fact quite active. So you've got depending if you're a manufacturer, I mean, I do work for a lot of manufacturers, and they have regular visits from NRCS. So the NRCS also looks at the compliance with SANS 289, 458, the E-mark one, they look at all of those as well. But the assignee will be your most common visitor, because they'll be visiting you several times a year. EHPs, I don't think will be happening a lot, mainly because there's just not enough resources. I think EHPs should rather be focusing on hygiene and R638 and those issues. Although, if they visit a factory and they're looking at R638, I suppose it wouldn't harm to look at some labels being produced in that facility.
Yeah, I think we can chat later when we've got time to talk about the whole expired food thing, because I think if we take media and we take the involvement of EHPs, often it is in response to claims from the public that expired product is being sold on the shelf, and then obviously the EHPs would go in and would get involved. Thank you so much, Janusz. We've got a couple more questions, but I'll hold them over. Thank you very much. Don't go anywhere. Marianne, I'm now coming across to you. So thank you very much for getting ready to come online and to take us through your presentation. We are now moving away from Pretoria, and we're moving to Northwest University, where Dr. Marianne Wicks is standing by. Marianne is committed to preventing childhood obesity, and she does this by improving our food environment. She loves cooking with her family. She's committed to conservation and the health of our planet. She's married to Stephen. He also loves her cooking, and he loves outdoors and being outdoors with her, and they have a beautiful daughter called Nika. She's currently a senior lecturer at the Center of Excellence for Nutrition at the Northwest University, and she's a registered dietitian. She had obtained her PhD in dietetics in 2017, and her areas of interest are nutrient profiling and obesity prevention strategies. And she's also an active and Marianne, we're looking forward to you talking to us about nutrient profiling and understanding how this works together with the information that we've just learned from Janusz. So over to you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Linda, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this very informative webinar. And yes, so I'm from Northwest University. Today I'm talking from my home in Potchefstroom, as we are not yet all allowed to be on campus. So it's a very interesting time for all of us. And we never thought this is the way that we would be teaching, and this is the way that we would be doing webinars or congresses and events. But yeah, it's actually fantastic to do this, and a great way to have a bunch of good people together without having a lot of traveling in between. So yes, so today I'm going to talk about nutrient profiling, and specifically it's going to be a more short summary with regards to the tool and why it is so important with regards to public health and with regards to, as we know, the food products that's available out there. So with me being a lecturer, I always enjoy, let me just quickly say, thing is behind. There we go. I enjoy asking questions. So I want you to think now, firstly, for yourself, what is a more healthy food and what is a less healthy food? So if you think daily food intake, what do you eat? What would you say? This is something that's healthy and actually contributing towards my health, and this is something that's less healthy. So think to yourself, how would you classify that, and what food would that be? And then I'll share some of my thoughts. So we all know an apple a day keeps the doctor away, as they say. And then I've got some spinach here. We all know about Popeye and his fantastic muscles with regards to spinach. So we know that the whole foods, the foods that are from nature, whole, unrefined, not processed, such as fruits and vegetables, are our healthy foods. And these are the foods that contribute towards our health. And then if we think about less healthy foods, I've got a nice decadent chocolate cake here, and then of course some nice hot fried chips. So we know these are the foods that we can say this is something that's not healthy or not going to contribute towards my health. But now we often are also faced with other foods that's available on the market, and we see a massive rise in these foods as a result of industrialization, as a result of requests for more different types of foods. And this is not negative. It's fantastic because it gives us variety, and it gives us, like I said, variety, and it gives us more options to choose from. But if you think of a food such as, for instance, now, a nice yogurt, and let's say this is a nice double cream sweetened yogurt, we can see in our intake data that double cream yogurt is actually something that's consumed much more often than it usually was. So here I've got a nice double cream sweetened yogurt, and then one of my favorite foods, peanut butter. So a nice smooth peanut butter with added salt, with added sugar. So this is the dilemma that we are in now. Do we classify these foods as more healthy or less healthy? Because they do consist of nutrients and components that do contribute towards our health. But unfortunately, with the flavor comes also some components or nutrients that do not benefit our health. So we sit with this dilemma, about uncertainty with regards to certain processed foods. Do we classify them as more healthy or less healthy? So if you would think of a continuum of healthiness, we would say that, for instance, the spinach is more healthy than the apple, even though they are both very healthy. But let's say, for instance, we now take the fructose, the intrinsic sugar of the apple, in consideration. So then the spinach would be more healthy than the apple, even though they are both more healthy foods. And if we go on the other side of the continuum, we would say that chocolate cake is less healthy than fried chips due to the total sugar and total fat content of this food and total energy content. But now we sit with this dilemma, but where on this continuum would we now place certain processed foods? And how do we define the healthiness of foods? And this is exactly where nutrient profiling fits in. It provides us with the science to classify or rank these foods on this continuum of healthiness. And this is based on the nutritional composition of the food products, with the outcome being to prevent disease and to promote health. So if we look again at the definition of nutrient profiling, if we think about how do I prevent disease, we think about these nutrients or food components that we need to limit. So what does science say is negative towards my health and would actually promote me from becoming overweight or obese, and then also suffering from its related diseases. And we know this is excessive energy intake, so total energy intake. And if you look at the nutrients or components, we know that saturated fat, free sugars, and sodium are these components that do promote weight gain and non-communicable disease development. But then on the other spectrum, we have to think, but what is going to promote my health and going to prevent me from developing these diseases? And the nutrients and components to encourage, there are a variety of them, but we specifically can think of components such as, for instance, fiber, total fiber content, protein. Does this food contain fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, unsaturated fatty acids, calcium, iron, potassium, zinc, numerous vitamins? So these are all components that would contribute towards my health. But it's very important always to understand that these components depend on the situation or the environment at hand. So these components would differ from certain countries depending on food availability, depending on income level. And we should take cognition and always remember that we as South Africa are facing a double burden of malnutrition. So at the one end, we are seeing this massive increase in overweight and obesity, but then we should not forget about the malnutrition or undernutrition on the other side. But with this as well, we are also seeing micronutrient deficiencies. So you can even have an individual who is overweight, but who are suffering from various micronutrient deficiencies. So if we are thinking about what would be the components to encourage, we need to remember what is our situation in South Africa. And that's why research and dietary intake data is so important, and why this should be the driver towards how we classify the healthiness of foods in our country. So now, just going back again, why am I concerned about the healthiness as foods? And as I mentioned in the beginning, we know that this is a situation that we are facing when we go to the food stores. And as I said, it's fantastic, especially for someone like me who loves cooking and loves working with food, because now I've got a variety. But unfortunately, variety and the higher amount of type of foods available causes confusion. So for me, it's quite much easier because I've got the nutritional knowledge, but majority of our South Africans do not have that knowledge, firstly. And secondly, majority of our South Africans do not have the financial income or the benefits to go about and always choose what is healthier, because the main driver of food choices, unfortunately, in South Africa remains income and cost of foods. So we are facing this global obesity pandemic, and this has led to the need for nutrition policies that are aimed at preventing obesity and its related diseases. So mainly these nutrition policies are all geared for creating healthier food environments. So all of them, the outcome of all of these policies are to create a healthier food environment for everyone. So what do these policies include? So we see regulating nutrient and health claims. Front of pack labeling is something that's also been recommended and used. Of course, restricting the marketing of less healthy foods to children, and then setting food standards, especially in school food environments. And then, of course, the fiscal policies. We know in South Africa we've got the sugar tax. So these are all various policies that try and improve our food environment with the aim of preventing obesity and its related diseases. Now, behind all of these policies actually lies nutrient profiling, because nutrient profiling is the science that supports these policies and supports the decisions that are made in these policies. So what is the science then behind nutrient profiling? How does this work, and why is this something that can be trusted as the guiding principle towards supporting these policies? Now, as I said, this is now a method of assessing nutritional quality of foods. And it is seen as a method that is objective, transparent, and reproducible. So what it basically is algorithms that consider the amount or presence of certain nutrients or food components or compounds to characterize the healthiness of foods. And these algorithms are based on your GDAs, your guideline daily amounts, or otherwise the WHO, the World Health Organization guidelines for what entails a healthy diet. So the World Health Organization, if I remember correctly, I think it's 2018 and the newest one is now 2019. They set out recommendations and specific targets to how do you classify a diet as being a healthy diet and a diet that would promote health and prevent disease. So there are certain thresholds with regards to fiber, sugar intake, and now all of these thresholds, the same as the guideline daily amounts, have been taken and they are the backbone of these algorithms of nutrient profiling models that are used to classify the healthiness of foods. So it's quite complex what lies behind these nutrient profiling models. But the models that are developed by authoritative institutions such as the WHO, such as universities and departments of health, are based on this and are based on science mainly. So, as I said, this now provides a science base for classifying foods. And for this reason, nutrient profiling is recognized by the World Health Organization to support these food policies. So all of these food policies that I've mentioned are also recommended by the World Health Organization as best buys in preventing obesity and preventing non-communicable diseases. And then, as I said, they also then recommend that when you do this with the support of an appropriate nutrient profiling model. Now, as a result of this, we've seen a massive proliferation of nutrient profiling models being available internationally. So a recent systematic review looked at the amount of nutrient profiling models that are available, and it indicated that within 6 years, the amount of nutrient profiling models available increased threefold. So there are numerous models available out there, but it's very important to remember that some of these models are industry models, so it's developed by the food industry, and others are developed by authoritative organizations or bodies, as I mentioned, for instance, the WHO or universities or departments of health. So when you're looking at a nutrient profiling model, just firstly always distinguish, is it an industry model or is it an authoritative model? Because we know and research has shown that the authoritative models are always stricter than the industry models. So all of these models always include nutrients to limit, such as saturated fat, total sugar, and sodium. Some also include non-nutritive sweeteners as a compound or a component to eliminate or limit. And then 86% of the models also included nutrients to promote, as I said, such as the protein, fiber, fruit and vegetable content. Unfortunately, there are limited information available regarding the validity of the models. And then the WHO also always recommends that if you are looking at using a nutrient profiling model, that you rather adopt or adapt a model that's already been implemented by an authoritative body than going and developing a new one, because you've got the science supporting the model. So take that model and then adapt it towards your needs, or towards the situational needs. And as I said, always in the back mind, we need to keep cognizance of what is the nutritional situation in the country and what are we trying to achieve by using a nutrient profiling model. And then lastly, we always, of course, recommend that validating a model before implementing it. So if we look at South Africa and the use of a nutrient profiling model in South Africa, now, as Janusz also mentioned, this is now mentioned in the R429 as where we firstly came about knowing about nutrient profiling or being aware of nutrient profiling. And in this draft regulation, it is recommended that the nutrient profiling model be used before any nutrient content or health claim can be made, and then also in the sense of marketing of foods to children. But We know that this is only a draft regulation, and as he's also said, it's been years since we've heard anything about this draft regulation. So we don't know whether this nutrient profiling model would be the model that the Department of Health would use in the future. But I think it's always good to use the model and to make sure that you are at least adhere to this. So whenever we know what we need to do in the future, we are already at a certain standard and we're already achieving a certain standard. So it's a good place to move forward from. But as we said, we're not sure where we are going with regards to this. So as I mentioned, the South African nutrient profiling model is then recommended as the first screening step for nutrient content or health claims. And then this model was validated before it was implemented into this draft regulation. So if you want to have a look at this nutrient profiling model, you can go onto the Department of Health website at Food Control, and then there at the bottom, there's a nice link to the calculator. So there's a website, and you can go there to the calculator. It contains all the information with regards to this nutrient profiling calculator, as well as all of the information with regards to how does this work. So if we look at the recommended nutrient profiling model and the South African nutrient profiling model, we can see that this model is across the board and it's a scoring model, meaning that it classifies foods across the board. So it classifies foods, it divides them into 3 categories. I'll give some more information with regards to the categories now. And then it used the same standards to classify these foods. It's including both disqualifying and qualifying nutrients. So we are seeing the nutrients to limit and then the nutrients or components to motivate in this model, which is very positive with regards to preventing disease and promoting health. And at the end point would contribute towards this double burden of malnutrition that we are seeing in South Africa. It's based on GDA, so it's not the WHO recommendations, but it's the guideline daily amounts, which is very similar to the WHO guidelines. And then, as I said, it has 3 food categories. So the first category is beverages. The second one is foods. So it's all foods not included in category 1 and 3. And then category 3 is your fats and oils. And then, of course, especially for today's information, it's important to take note that your cheeses, your hard cheeses with a calcium content greater than 320 milligrams per 100 gram portion also falls within the group 3 category. So group 1 is beverages. Group 2 is everything, all the foods that are not included within beverages, and then the fats and oils group, which is group 3. So as I said, it uses the same definition of more or less healthy applied to all food groups. But then how it distinguishes within these food groups is with regards to its cut-off points. So how it calculates the points, but you don't need to calculate it. When you punch it into calculator, it does it automatically for you. But just to give you a bit of an idea how it works, is it calculates the baseline points. So these are based on all of the negative nutrient content. So that's the energy, saturated fat, total sugar, and sodium. And then based on your qualifying or your positive nutrient content, which would be the protein, fiber, percentage of fruits and vegetables, or percentage of concentrated fruits and vegetables, it qualifies or calculates the modifying point. So there you can see in your right-hand corner, I've got a bit of a calculation there. So it takes a baseline and then it subtracts the modifying points from that. But it's important to note that if your baseline points exceeds 13, so if it's greater than 13, equal or greater to 13, you will not score points for the proteins unless you score 5 points, which is your max points for your fruit, vegetable, legume, and nut content. So just to take cognition of that and remember that when you're calculating your product's points. So then how it classifies the foods, if it's a food and it has less than 4, it's classified as more healthy. Beverages less than 1 is then classified as more healthy. And then, of course, for the foods and the drinks above 3, it's in less, above 4 and above 1, it's classified as a less healthy product. With regards to the group 3 content, I just need to quickly have a look again at what is the cutoff point for that. If I remember correctly, I think it's 30 or 38. I'll just have to clarify that again. But when you look at the calculator, it provides you those cutoff points. So it automatically will tell you less healthy or more healthy. And then if you then this would then, of course, with regards to R4 to 9, then have said, okay, fine, would you be able to make a claim or not? But as we said, R4 to 9 is not the one that we are following now, but this is definitely a tool that you can use to guide you with regards to the healthiness of your food product and to use to improve your product portfolio. And of course, if we look at what's coming in the future, we know that we are already at a good place if we look at health claims and nutrient content claims. So how can this model now aid us and help us in preventing obesity? So when we look at the human diet, we automatically think that the healthiness of the food improves the healthiness of the overall diet, which would of course then improve the overall health of the individual. We know that with regards to the healthiness of the food, we need to also remember that these models do not take into account portion sizes, so the amount of food eaten at a time, and then also maybe things that are added to this food. Do you like adding sauces or sugars or oils? So it doesn't take into account preparation method at home. But remember, this is now when the individual is standing at a point of sale and choosing a food, or maybe with regards to, as I said, a school food environment, what's available, what's allowed to be sold in this environment. So how would the nutrient profiling model help? So if we look at the profiling model, we would say that this would guide us with regards to our classifying and our science behind how do I classify a food. And then what the food producer or supplier can do is use this model to guide them with regards to their product portfolio and development. So this is fantastic with regards to reformulation. Then, of course, this would then guide the consumer in making food choices. If we think now going back to content claims or front of pack labeling, and this would then, of course, be supported by a regulation. And then hopefully this would lead to the consumer making a healthier food choice, then leading overall to improved health outcomes. So as I said, creating healthier foods is a massive way that we can use this model with regards to product or even meal reformulation with regards to a restaurant. We've seen great success with regards to the salt reduction strategy and the salt regulation. Massive success with regards to this in our country. With regards to the sugar tax, we're still looking at how is this improving outcomes. We have seen, if you just look at on the market, what's available on the market, we are seeing smaller serving sizes, but unfortunately, we are seeing a great increase in the addition of non-nutritive sweeteners. And then, of course, we have to remember that if we look at reformulation, the idea should be about creating a healthier food preference in the consumer. And personally, I believe that just adding non-nutritive sweeteners is not necessarily the answer to this. We can also use this with regards to health education, so specifically for a professional or individual, or maybe in your product portfolio, guiding the consumer in what is a healthier food product in your portfolio. We've also seen that it's used, these nutrient profiling models are being used, for instance, in applications for food selection. Discovery Vitality used it for the healthy food switch application. This is now put on the back seat. They are changing this around, but they have been using it with regards to classifying foods with regards to vitality points. And then, of course, the food environment should support healthy food choices. And as I said, school food environments can use this as setting standards to what's available in food in schools, used for responsible marketing towards children. And then, of course, as I said, looking at our portfolio, but then we also need to remember that these healthier foods should be affordable. If it's not affordable, unfortunately in our country, it won't be the food of choice. It should be available, and then, of course, always safe and then desirable. So it's quite a challenge to get to developing these types of foods. And then we also have to keep in our back mind always, the aim should be to prevent disease, but then also to promote health. And by doing this, we need to not exceed nutrient or energy intake, but also always remember to try and correct deficiencies. And that's why I'm a massive supporter of a nutrient profiling model that makes use of positive nutrients as well. And going forward, this is something that we can use to motivate the use of a model like this. And that is my last slide. So with that, I would just like to say thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you and yeah, to share some of my thoughts and my support for something like nutrient profiling. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Marianne. That was very interesting. I'm really glad to hear that there's another supporter of peanut butter, but I have to say that it has to be crunchy. Sorry about that.
I agree with you on that one. I didn't include a picture, but I'm also a crunchy peanut butter fan.
But I can understand why there's confusion in this area, particularly if there are multiple models and no clear legal guidance in terms of which one we should be using.
Yes.
And I was also very disappointed to hear that my double cream chocolate chip yogurt is probably not as healthy as what I thought it was. So yeah, I'll have to put it through the calculator again from that perspective. Thank you very much, Marianne. I'm now going to bring Jody True online. Jody is the national technical one of the national technical managers, or rather, she's the technical manager for the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape for the Dairy Standard Agency. And Jody is going to take us through a very interesting development that the DSA have brought online, and that is a free labeling tool to assist you with how you can make sure that your labels comply with the legal requirements and making sure that you don't get into trouble when it comes to that inspection by the Departments of Agriculture or even the Departments of Health. So Jody, over to you. I can see that you worked in the trenches in the dairy industry for a long time. So you're not talking here from knowing a bit about the dairy industry. You've worked as a lab technician, a lab manager, as a technical manager in a variety of dairies. You've even worked for one of the big retailers. And currently, obviously, your role at the Dairy Standard Agencies is more in terms of promoting dairy quality and making sure that the dairy industry is doing the right thing. So thank you so much for being with us today. And over to you. We look forward to your presentation. Everyone out there, don't forget Jody's tests. Here they come.
Thank you very much, Linda. Good morning, everybody. Well, yes, my topic today is the introduction to dairy labeling, as Linda rightly said so. And just to give you all just a little bit of background as to where the Dairy Standard Agency falls into the context of the structure of Milk South Africa. So we are a non-profit company established by the organized dairy industry. And its members include the South African Milk Processors Organization, the Milk Producers Organization, the South African Society of Dairy Technology, as well as the South African National Consumers Union. And our primary goal is to promote the improvement of compliance in respect of safety, the product composition, as well as metrology standards. And our mandate is the monitoring of milk and also other dairy products, the communication with the industry, as well as other stakeholders, and then also as a support service to the dairy industry and our other stakeholders. On that note, let us just jump straight into the first poll and let's see if everybody's still awake.
Right, so you see, I told you it wasn't going to just be listening. You now have to actually vote. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a poll, as Jody said, and you need to choose which one you think is correct. So take a minute, look carefully at the two examples, and then make sure you choose the correct answer. So here we go, we're all going to vote, and we are then going to see how well we understand labeling. Here we go. Please select one, and we've got 15 seconds. There we go. That's it. You guys are getting it right. We're collecting responses, so make sure that you vote. We've only got 40% of you that have voted. Keep voting. For those of you that have, well done. Right, another 5 seconds. Make sure you vote. Right, okay, so Jody, This is the response that we've gotten from the 56% of the people that have voted. So if we share this information so that you can understand, we've got 1% of us, or rather 9% of us say number 1 is correct, and 79% of us say that number 2 is correct. And then we've got some that aren't sure. We've got 12% that said both. So you need to help us. We obviously, you know, are the 79% of us correct, or are the 12% of us correct? So you need to advise.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Well, number 2 in this regard is the correct one. So thank you very much for everybody that chose that one. Yes, so slide item number 2 would be the correct one. Okay.
Okay, Jody, back over to you. You can continue with your slides.
Thank you. Great. It's just...
Bit stuck?
Yeah, a bit stuck, yes.
Okay, just click your mouse and then you should be able to move on.
Still nothing. There we go.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. So the philosophy of new food legislation and also the voluntary standards places a very strong emphasis on the prevention of food safety risks in the supply chain. Now, dairy processors or manufacturers are also expected to establish, implement, and also monitor comprehensive prevention-based food safety systems, as well as to maintain the plans for corrective actions when necessary. So, in essence, labeling is a reflection of product integrity as well as compliance given corporate ethics. So, effective regulation is really not easy to develop and implement, as you all know. Therefore, the regulators and the regulated are required to have a very clear understanding of the business and technology that is to be regulated. So, to provide the effective communication of minimum legal requirements, dairy product labeling is of the utmost importance. For milk producers, dairy manufacturers, and retailers, the label of a dairy product is a manner of communicating the important product information to buyers easily and readily. And for the consumers, on the other hand, it is one of the primary means of differentiating between the vast different products and brands in order to make an informed decision when purchasing that particular product. Dairy product labeling in South Africa is actually a very interesting but also striking example of the complexities facing the entire industry and of the parallel relationships or diverging interests among government departments, the dairy processors, distributors, and also food retailers. So as you all know, and everybody has spoken about this, we have a number of different regulations that we need to adhere to in order to comply. And for this, Regulation R1510 of the Department of Agriculture, Regulation 146 from Department of Health, as well as SANS 289 of our SABS standards. And due to the importance of effective regulation and communication, it therefore necessitates the need for some sort of guideline or tool to ensure, firstly, compliance to all the relevant regulations pertaining to this industry as well as the specific product. And then not forgetting all the other regulations and standards that we need to keep in mind. Then secondly, also to ensure the correct interpretation of these regulations. And then thirdly, to make these somewhat easier to attain. So compliance is like a big jigsaw puzzle, and of laws and then also of regulations. So understanding the mechanics of regulations is an essential part of compliance and allows a more effective approach. In my opinion, practical exercises and case studies will reinforce that key points towards applying the labeling regulation requirements. Here we have another one. Let's jump straight into the next poll.
Absolutely, you can see she just said it. She believes in making sure that we do case studies. So here we go, everybody. You now can choose. You either can choose number 3 or number 4 or both. Please won't you go ahead and vote. For those of you that weren't fast enough the first time, here's your time opportunity to participate. Right, come on then, 30% of you have voted. Keep going, keep going. Another 5 seconds. Right, so here we have slightly different results. So I'm going to close the poll. Thank you very much for voting, everybody. Right, let's have a look. See, that's what the answers were, Jody. You can see 53% of us said it was number 3, and 29% of us said it was number 4, and 18% of us still can't make up our mind. So which one of us are right?
Okay, thank you. The correct one is number 3, item number 3. So that is the cheddar and just the cheddar on the packaging. So well done to those that chose item number 3.
Off you go. Back to you.
Right. As you know, the DSA as a self-regulatory initiative has seen the need to provide a supportive role in the development of communication or a communication tool to assist in the interpretation and also the implementation of labeling issues relating to product composition as well as nutrition. So this exciting development was done initially in conjunction with industry members, as well in consultation with the Department of Agriculture. So this is a significant improvement to the work that we initiated in 2014, where we launched the first item, which was the Guide to Dairy Product Labeling in South Africa. And at that stage, it was still a hard copy of this guideline to help the industry role players with labeling compliance. So our next step thus was to make this guideline available to the industry in electronic format to make it more accessible to everybody. But we all knew that the time would eventually come to improve and also update our existing labeling guideline. Also seeing when regulations were updated and new regulations came into play, we had to update our existing ones. And this is where we got to. So I want to introduce our new and improved DSA labeling website. And on there you can see the link to gain access to the labeling website. And we call it our dairy labeling solution. So this, everybody, is an interactive site enabling all registered users the means to evaluate their own labels in accordance with the relevant regulations. I'm going to take you through the step-by-step methods in order to gain access to the site and all of that. So on the site, to register, you need to register in order to obtain the full functionality of the site. So I encourage everybody to go onto the site and to register in order to make use of everything that the site provides. Right. So let's just go one step further, and I will show you in real time what the site actually looks like and its capability. So this is our landing page once you've entered the address, and you click on your labels, which will then take you to all the different products that we've catered for. And as you can see, we currently have 9 product labels that we were concentrating on, but it's not only limited to these 9 products. So in future, we will expand the range in order to incorporate more of the product lines. Yeah. So for example, if you want to evaluate your milk label, you go to the icon, you can click on it, and this will take you to this page where you would be able to see the full label and also all the components or requirements that need to be printed onto the label or on the packaging. Then if you want to go into further detail or you want to know exactly what is required, so for instance, for class designation, you just go to that assigned one, you click on it, and this sheet will appear. So in there, all the relevant requirements pertaining to class designation that you've selected will be displayed, and you can easily scroll through it to see if your label complies or what other information you still need to gather. I just want to show you right. So under my account, if you want to actually go and evaluate a label, you will create a new label on this tab, and then it'll ask you what you want to create. So let's take milk again, and on there it'll give you this checklist. And like I said, this is an interactive site, so you can actually go and just give a name to it, which type of label, and also you're going to design the label. You go onto your checklist and you can physically click everything that is required on the label, like that. You can, midway, if you get caught up with something else, you can save your checklist. Okay, right. So what it does, it captures what you've already done on your label. So as you can see, the last one, the completion rate was only 12%. So that is an indication of what you still need to do in order to complete. So very easy and simple. If you want to complete that, you go and you just click until you have obtained your 100% of your label. So that is just a very quick run through into what the whole site can actually do. And just to show you just what I just spoke about, just briefly. So you click on the labels, you get there, your checklist. There you go. And that in a nutshell is what the site, and it is really just a brief explanation and just a demonstration into what the capabilities of the functionality of the site actually is. Linda, this is our last poll. Let's get going with this.
Just a comment. I think, and even now, I should be able to get a label right. So I think this is great. This is really, really an exciting development. Okay, everyone, now you need to focus because this is a slightly different question. Here, Jody is trying to trick us. So she is trying to see whether we're really awake at this point in time. So we are now going to go into this poll. So look very carefully. We need to understand which of these is correct.
Which is incorrect.
Yep, I think it should say which is incorrect.
Yes.
Keep voting, keep voting. Five seconds. Great. I think if we have a look, Jody, I think we got a little bit confused here because it should be, the correct answer should be that both of them were actually incorrect. Is that the right answer?
That's correct, yes. It should be both.
All right, so I think some of us were a little bit confused, but there's definitely a typo. So apologies for that, everybody. If you were not sure whether or not you got that one correct or incorrect, it should actually be that both of these are incorrect in terms of everything that Jody has just chatted to us about. So there we go. Jody, won't you bring us home to the ending of your presentation?
Yes, that does bring me to the end. So I just want to thank everybody for listening to me and for your attention. And if you have any queries, please, or comments, please feel free to do so.
Perfect. Now, can I just confirm something? It looked like I needed to register, but other than that, this is absolutely free. Am I correct?
That is 100% correct.
So I can go and register online, and then I can go and play, and I can go and see how it works and understand how it works. And then if I have any comments or questions, we can obviously contact you, Jody. Is that correct?
That is correct, Linda. And also on the site, you can also send a message that would reach us, and then we can communicate to you or to the user.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Jody, just a question here from one of the delegates. Won't you go back to the pictures of both that were incorrect? And can you just please explain to us why they're both incorrect? Because now we're all a little confused.
Okay. Thank you for the question. On item number 5, the word natural. And because it is a dairy product regulated under the Agricultural Product Standards Act, we are not allowed to use the name or the word natural. And also in terms of Regulation 1510, just the class designation and how it is depicted on the label is also incorrect. So there are a couple of, well, a whole lot of flaws on the packaging itself. In item number 6, that all actually boils down to Regulation 146 from the Department of Health, where the claim that says dairy products may reduce the risk of osteoporosis is incorrect because you, according to the regulation, you are not allowed to make a health claim on the product.
Yeah.
And then also the class designation is also incorrect, and the weight, depiction, yeah, so.
There's a whole bunch of things that are wrong there. Okie dokes. All right. Okay, so that's why we need to have this tool so that we can make sure that we get it right and we don't make any of these mistakes. And they, as we heard from Janusz, they can be extremely costly mistakes. So thank you so much, Jody. We really do appreciate your presentation. Right, for those of you out there, we have gone a few minutes over time, but that's not the end of the world because I think this is still very, very valuable information. So what I'm going to ask you now is to just jot down some questions. So please, can you make sure that you pass them our way so that we know exactly what it is that you'd like to chat to us about. We do have the presenters online, and so they would be more than happy to answer those questions. So please won't you give us a shout out in that respect if you haven't already passed through your question. A couple of comments that we have noted from the delegates, we will definitely pass through to the Dairy Standard Agency. For those of you that have already had your questions answered, hopefully that will assist you in terms of understanding more about labeling and why this is such an important aspect. I'm really delighted at this tool. I've known about it for a while, and I just think it's so great to see it finally in the public domain and ready for you to use. And really kudos to the Dairy Standard Agency for making this available, because I think it really assists all of you out there in ensuring that you are able to do the right thing, as Jody so easily demonstrated. Right, last opportunity for questions to come through. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. Thank you so much for your participation. If there are any questions, you're more than welcome to send them through to us. We will make sure that the Dairy Standard Agency get them. And thank you for being with us. Just a final thanks to everybody who's participated today in terms of this webinar, everyone who's contributed. We really do appreciate you being with us, and we do appreciate the input from the speakers and all of the bodies that have been involved. I'm going to now just hand over as a last word to Yompi Vertigo from the Dairy Standard Agency, just to make sure that everybody knows how important it is that you were with us today. Yompi, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. I'm really truly excited to see the numbers that attended the workshop, or not the webinar rather. I think it's absolutely valuable. And I think what is important at the end of the day is that we, in a very collaborative manner from industry and from the authorities, work together to ensure that dairy labelling is on target. I think we sit with the dispensation that we as an industry definitely has a huge responsibility to ensure that the consumer is not misinformed. But on the other side, we also recognize the fact that in this, the authorities have the constitutional assignment to make sure that the laws or different laws are absolutely enforced. I really thank everybody for participating, especially our presenters. To Janus, I think maybe it's sort of a daily practice to you, but I think in general, we all know that this is a very complex environment, and if you don't know what you're doing, you could easily say that your label isn't compliant. In fact, you might only comply with DAF regulation, if I can use the term DAF, but perhaps not with DOH. So it's very complex, and I think thank you very much for explaining in such a short period. Also to Marianne, I think your presentation was really fresh, and it really excited me to get the grips on, even if it's, the authoritative model from the Regulation 429 and its draft, it really means a lot, and it lays a solid foundation to start looking at how to interpret what is meant by profiling. And Jody, thank you once again. I think you really made it easy. I want to encourage all the participants to really spend time, and you will discover that there's a whole lot of information that was not even dealt with today that will really enrich your knowledge about the legislation at first, and also just general compliance with labeling. That is really absolutely fantastic. To Food Focus, to Linda and Adele and the team, thank you very much for assisting us with this exercise. It was really well presented. All I can say is I'm very pleased to also mention that we are going to have workshops to this effect that obviously will dig deeper into this whole exercise of making sure your labels are compliant. Very important. Then lastly, if you'll just allow me, we've got the SASDT workshop webinar that is coming up soon. Dr. Marianne Weeks will also participate in that specific one. That is something of a presentation or a webinar via the South African Society for Dairy Technology, and those members that are of the society are encouraged also to attend that specific symposium or webinar that is soon coming up. The dates will be made available. Thank you once again. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Yompi, and thank you very much for allowing us to be a part of this process. In terms of CPD, I think there's probably two aspects that may be considered, but I know the number of the inquiries that or in relation to CPD have all come from the EHP, so it will more than likely be under the Health Professionals Council, but possibly the DSA will also investigate SACNAS-P. And then also just to make sure that everybody is comfortable with the fact that the recording will be available. This will be posted on the Food Focus website, and we will make sure that it goes out on social media and also to the Dairy Standard Agency website. Also make sure that you look out for your certificate of attendance if you've attended the entire webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you that have requested copies of the presentations, we will definitely ask the presenters for this, and if these are available, they will also be forwarded to you. Thanks everyone, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and we look forward to seeing you again on a Food Focus webinar. See you soon.